Claire Bennett used to believe happiness announced itself quietly. Not with fireworks or champagne, but with the ordinary things that happened so often you stopped noticing them. Julian leaving his coffee mug beside the kitchen sink. The soft click of his keys landing in the ceramic bowl by the door. His shirts hanging in the closet beside hers as if the space had always belonged to both of them. Their Chicago apartment overlooked the river, high enough that the city seemed almost peaceful at night. From their windows, Claire could see the lights of downtown trembling across the dark water, and sometimes she would stand there barefoot with a glass of wine, while Julian wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. 6 weeks, he would whisper, resting his chin against her shoulder. 6 weeks until you're officially stuck with me. Claire would laugh. I've been stuck with you for 7 years. Engagement changes everything. Apparently. He would kiss her temple. You're going to look beautiful. She believed him. That was the cruelest part. She believed him because for 7 years, Julian had given her very little reason not to. They had met at Northwestern after graduation, when Claire was working late at a small architecture firm and Julian was beginning his first year at a prestigious law firm downtown. Their lives had grown together gradually rather than dramatically. They bought furniture together. They argued about paint colors. They adopted a rescue dog named Milo. They learned which restaurants stayed open late when neither of them wanted to cook. They became the couple their friends described with a smile and a certain envy. Even Julian's parents, who had never completely hidden their preference for women from families like theirs, eventually accepted Claire because Julian had chosen her. Their wedding was scheduled for October, at an old lakeside estate outside the city, with 200 guests, white flowers, a string quartet, and a reception that Claire's mother kept calling the wedding of the decade. Claire had spent months planning it. Julian had promised to handle the honeymoon. Italy, he had said one night. Florence, then Lake Como. You hate planning. Not this. He smiled at her from across the dinner table. This is different. That night, Claire had gone to bed believing she had finally arrived at the life she had spent years building. She did not know that the first crack had already appeared. It began with Julian's phone. He had never been secretive with it before. It used to lie wherever he left it, on the kitchen counter, beside the shower, under a stack of papers in the living room. Then, almost imperceptibly, he began carrying it everywhere. Into the bathroom, into the bedroom. Even onto the balcony when he went outside to make a call. Claire noticed, but she said nothing. She told herself people changed. Work had become demanding. Julian had recently been promoted to partner, and his firm was handling a major corporate acquisition. His hours stretched later, dinner became something they ate separately. His answers became shorter. How was your day? Claire would ask. Long. Anything interesting? Nothing worth talking about. Sometimes she would wait for him until midnight. Sometimes she fell asleep before he came home. One Thursday evening, she woke at 1:17 a.m. and found his side of the bed empty. Light from the hallway spilled across the sheets. She walked into the living room and found him standing by the window. Julian? He turned too quickly. Hey, why are you awake? Couldn't sleep. Claire looked at the phone in his hand. Everything okay? Yeah, he smiled. It was a smile that arrived a second too late. Go back to bed. She wanted to ask who he had been texting. Instead, she nodded. Okay, he watched her walk away. And for the first time in 7 years, Julian felt relieved when Claire left the room. That frightened him more than the affair itself. The affair had started 3 months earlier with something Julian could still tell himself was harmless. Sabrina Cole worked in the same office building, though not in his department. She was 29, confident, polished, and newly divorced. She knew how to make Julian feel admired without making it obvious. At first, they exchanged messages about work. Then drinks after meetings. Then dinners that Julian described to Claire as client events. By the time he realized the relationship had crossed a line, the line no longer mattered. He had already crossed it. Claire knew none of this. She only knew that the man she loved seemed to be gradually withdrawing from her, as though some invisible hand were pulling him toward a life she could not see. The night everything changed, Claire was sitting at the kitchen island surrounded by invitation samples. She had spread them across the marble countertop, comparing ivory paper with cream paper, debating whether the lettering looked too formal. Julian came home at 10:43. He dropped his briefcase by the door. "You're still awake?" "I was waiting." He glanced at the invitations. "Claire, I told you I was busy." She looked up. "I know. Then why are you waiting?" The question landed harder than he intended. Claire stared at him. "Because we're getting married." Julian rubbed his forehead. "I know. You don't sound happy." "I'm tired." "You're always tired now." Silence. Julian walked toward the kitchen. Claire watched him carefully. "Is there something you're not telling me?" His jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said." "Claire, please don't do this tonight." "Do what?" "Turn everything into a conversation about us." She stared at him. "Everything is about us right now." He had no answer. She lowered her eyes to the invitations. "Just tell me if something has changed." Julian looked at the woman across from him, the woman who had known him before the money, before the title, before the expensive apartment and the invitations with gold lettering. He loved her, he did. But love had become complicated by desire, guilt, vanity, and the intoxicating fantasy that somewhere else there might be a version of himself who had never made a mistake. "Nothing has changed," he said. Claire nodded slowly. "Okay." But she no longer believed him. 2 days later, she found the message. It appeared on his laptop because Julian had forgotten to close a browser window. Claire had not been searching. That mattered to her later. She would repeat it to herself many times. She had not been snooping. She had simply been looking for the seating spreadsheet he had promised to send. The message was from Sabrina. "We need to talk before you marry her." Claire stopped breathing. Another message followed. "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. I'm pregnant." She read it twice. Then a third time. The apartment suddenly seemed enormous. The refrigerator hummed. A siren moved somewhere far below. Outside, Chicago continued as if nothing had happened. Claire sat down slowly. Her hand went to her stomach, though she had no reason to. She looked at the wedding invitations scattered across the counter. Ivory, cream, gold lettering. A future reduced to paper. When Julian came home that evening, he found Claire sitting in the dark. She did not cry. She simply looked at him. "Who is Sabrina?" Julian froze. And in that single moment, before he spoke, Claire understood everything. Not because he confessed, not because he apologized. Because the expression on his face was the expression of a man whose secret had finally become someone else's truth. "Claire, is she pregnant?" Julian closed his eyes. She waited. Finally, he whispered, "Yes." Claire looked down at her engagement ring. For 7 years, she had believed the ring represented a promise. Now it felt like evidence. "How long?" she asked. Julian swallowed. "Claire, I can explain." "How long?" "For months." Her eyes lifted slowly. "For months?" He said nothing. "We were planning our wedding 4 months ago." "I know. You were sleeping beside me." "I know. You were telling me you loved me." Julian's voice broke. "I did love you." Claire stood. "Did?" He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something worse than guilt in his eyes. She saw uncertainty. And she knew that whatever happened next, the life they thought they had was already gone. The next morning, Julian placed Claire's engagement ring on the kitchen counter as carefully as if it were something fragile, and somehow that was worse than throwing it away. Outside the windows, Chicago was buried beneath a pale February rain, the river a sheet of dull steel between the buildings. Claire had not slept. Neither had Julian. They had spent the night in separate rooms, separated by a hallway that suddenly felt longer than the 7 years between the day they met and the day he betrayed her. "I'm going to do the right thing," Julian said. Claire stood by the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "The right thing." She repeated the words without emotion. "That's what you're calling this?" "I'm saying I have a responsibility now." "You had a responsibility before she got pregnant." Julian looked away. "Claire. No. Don't say my name like that. Not when you're about to explain to me why cheating was actually a moral decision." His jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to justify what I did. You already are." She turned toward him. "You're just using a different word." Julian exhaled slowly. Sabrina is carrying my child. And I was carrying your future. The sentence stopped him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Claire looked at the ring on the counter. It had cost more than her first car, more than she had ever expected anyone to spend on her. She remembered Julian kneeling in the snow outside a restaurant 2 winters earlier, his hands shaking as he opened the box. He had promised her forever. Now forever had become a woman named Sabrina and an unborn child Claire had never seen. "Are you in love with her?" Claire asked. Julian hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer. "I care about her," he finally said. Claire laughed once, softly. "That wasn't my question." "It's complicated." "Everything becomes complicated when people don't want to say the truth." He walked toward the kitchen island. "I don't know what I feel for her. But you know what you're going to do?" "Yes." Claire nodded. "You're choosing her." Julian looked at her. "I'm choosing my child." "No," Claire said quietly. "You're choosing the life that comes after what you did." "What does that mean?" "It means you're telling yourself that because a baby exists, the affair becomes something noble." His expression hardened. "That's unfair." "Is it? What would you have me do? Walk away from my child?" "I never asked you to." "Then what do you want?" Claire stared at him. "I wanted the man who promised to marry me to understand that he didn't get to destroy our relationship and then hide behind responsibility." Julian lowered his voice. "You don't understand what this means." "Then explain it." "I have to be there for Sabrina." "Be there for your child," Claire said. "That doesn't mean you have to marry the woman you cheated with." He looked toward the rain-streaked windows. "She's alone." Claire almost smiled. "And I'm what?" Julian had no answer. That was when something inside Claire finally broke. Not loudly. There was no screaming, no shattered glass, no dramatic collapse. Just a quiet surrender of hope. Julian had made his choice, and the cruelest part was that he seemed to believe it was inevitable. "When are you moving out?" she asked. "Claire." "When?" "I'll stay somewhere else tonight." "Good. I don't want to leave you like this." She looked at him with tired disbelief. "You already did." Julian packed 2 suitcases that afternoon. Claire remained in the bedroom while he moved through the apartment collecting shirts, watches, documents, and the small objects that had once belonged to both of them. Their life disappeared piece by piece into black luggage. At the doorway, Julian stopped. "I'm sorry." Claire did not turn around. "You should be. I never wanted to hurt you." "That's not true." She finally looked at him. "You wanted something more than you wanted to protect me." "That's different," he swallowed. "Maybe someday you'll understand why I had to do this." Claire's face went still. "I understand perfectly." He seemed almost relieved. "Then you know I don't have a choice." "No, Julian, you have a choice. You just don't like the one that would make you responsible for what you did." He looked wounded, and Claire realized that, even now, some part of him expected her to comfort him. She didn't. 3 weeks later, the wedding venue canceled their reservation. The florist refunded half the deposit. The photographer sent a polite email. Claire deleted the wedding website herself. She sat at her desk after midnight, staring at the screen while a countdown that had once made her smile disappeared forever. 0 days until the wedding. She closed the laptop. Her mother wanted her to leave Chicago for a while. Her friends wanted her to block Julian. Her sister wanted her to tell everyone what he had done. Claire did none of it. She went to work. She answered emails. She attended meetings. She smiled when clients spoke to her. But everywhere she went, there were reminders of the life she had lost. A restaurant where Julian had proposed. A coffee shop where they had spent Sunday mornings. A furniture store where they had once argued over a dining table. Chicago seemed determined to preserve every version of her except the one she was becoming. Julian, meanwhile, moved into a luxury condo downtown with Sabrina. The photographs appeared online within weeks. Sabrina posted a picture of 2 coffee cups beside a sonogram image. Julian's hand was visible beside hers. The caption read, "A new chapter." Claire saw it because a mutual friend sent her the screenshot. She stared at the image for a long time. Then she deleted the message. She did not cry. But that evening, she found herself sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub, unable to explain why the picture hurt more than the confession had. It was not the baby. She could never blame a child for the choices of adults. It was the language. A new chapter. As if everything before it had been a draft. As if 7 years could be erased by 3 words. A week later, Julian called. Claire almost ignored him. Hello, it's me. I know. Can we talk? About what? Us. Claire closed her eyes. There is no us. There could still be something. You're marrying Sabrina. I haven't married her yet. Claire's voice became cold. That distinction is supposed to comfort me? I'm trying to make sure I don't make another mistake. You already made it. Claire, please. He sounded frustrated now. I need you to understand that this isn't about replacing you. She laughed quietly. That's exactly what it feels like. It's not that simple. It is to me. I have a child coming. Then be a good father. I will. Good, and I need you to accept that. Claire looked out the window. Snow had begun falling over the city, softening the streets, covering everything in white. I accept that you made a choice, she said. I don't have to accept the story you tell yourself about it. There was silence on the other end. What story? Julian asked. That you were forced to choose her. Her voice softened. You weren't. Claire. You chose her before you knew there would be a baby. He said nothing. You chose her when you kissed her. You chose her every time you lied to me. You chose her when you came home and slept beside me. The pregnancy didn't make the choice, Julian. It just gave you a reason you could live with. He hung up first. Claire placed the phone on the table and sat quietly. Across the city, Julian stared at his dark screen, angry because she had said the one thing he had spent weeks trying not to admit. He had convinced himself that fatherhood had taken his freedom away. The truth was more uncomfortable. Fatherhood had simply made the consequences of his desire impossible to ignore. And somewhere beneath his certainty, beneath the new apartment and the photographs and the promises he was making to Sabrina, there remained a memory he could not silence. Claire standing in their kitchen, looking at him as if she had finally discovered the stranger living inside the man she loved. He would tell himself for months that she would eventually understand. He did not yet know that one day, understanding would be the last thing he wanted from her. Ethan Calloway had known Julian Mercer since they were 19, which meant he knew the difference between Julian's apologies and his excuses. He knew the way Julian became charming when cornered, the way he turned moral arguments into practical ones, the way he could make selfishness sound like responsibility if he spoke calmly enough. What Ethan did not know was how to remain his best friend after watching him destroy the woman he had once promised to marry. You don't have to take sides, Julian told him one night at a private club in River North. I'm not asking you to. Ethan sat across from him, untouched bourbon in front of him. You're asking me to stand beside you at your wedding. Julian looked irritated. You're my best man. Exactly. So. Ethan leaned back. So I need to know whether you expect me to pretend this was some unavoidable tragedy. Julian's expression hardened. Sabrina is pregnant. I know. Then you understand. I understand you're going to be a father. Ethan paused. I don't understand why becoming a father required you to lie to Claire for 4 months. Julian looked down at the table. You don't know everything. Then tell me. It doesn't matter. Ethan studied him. That's what people say when the truth doesn't help them. Julian sighed. I made a mistake. No. You made a series of decisions. Julian looked up sharply. You sound like her. Ethan did not answer. He had heard Claire say almost the same thing weeks earlier. And the fact that Julian noticed the resemblance unsettled him. You loved her, Ethan said. I still care about her. That's not what I asked. Julian's eyes narrowed. Why are you so interested in this? Ethan stood. Because Claire doesn't deserve to be treated like collateral damage. She's moving on. Then let her. I am. Ethan looked at his oldest friend for a long moment. No, Julian. You're building a new life and expecting everyone else to pretend the old one never existed. He left before Julian could answer. 2 days later, Ethan received a message from Claire. I think some of my things are still at the apartment. Julian said you might be able to help. Ethan stared at the message longer than necessary. He typed 3 different replies before settling on the simplest one. Of course. Tell me when. They met on a Saturday morning. The apartment felt different without Julian living there. Claire stood in the hallway, holding a cardboard box. I thought you could help me get the last things from the storage room. Ethan nodded. Sure. I'm sorry to bother you. You're not. She looked at him. You don't have to do this. I know. He took the box from her. That's why I'm doing it. A faint smile appeared on her face. You always talk like that? Like what? Like you're in a courtroom. Occupational hazard. You're not a lawyer. No. But I've known Julian long enough to argue with him professionally. She laughed. It was small, but real. Ethan noticed the sound. He also noticed the way Claire immediately looked embarrassed for laughing. What? He asked. Nothing. You haven't laughed much lately. Her smile disappeared. People keep noticing. Ethan said nothing. They walked downstairs. In the storage room, they found boxes from their old life. Christmas decorations, photographs, a set of wine glasses Claire's mother had given them, an old camera, and a framed photograph from a trip to Maine. Claire picked it up. In the picture, she and Julian were standing on a rocky beach, wind pulling at their clothes, both laughing at something outside the frame. Ethan glanced at it. That was a good trip. Claire looked at him. You were there, I know. I remember you complaining about the weather. I was right. It rained for 3 days. You still went hiking. Julian dared me. Claire smiled. You always did whatever he dared you to do. Ethan looked at the photograph. Not always. She understood the meaning beneath his words. You mean the wedding? Yes. Are you still going to be his best man? Ethan hesitated. I don't know. Claire put the photograph down. You should be. Why? Because you've been his friend since college? That doesn't mean I have to approve of him. No. She looked toward the boxes. But if you walk away, he'll tell himself everyone abandoned him because of me. Ethan looked at her carefully. You still protect him? No. Claire shook her head. I know what he did. I just don't want to become the reason people hate him. Ethan's expression softened. Claire, you didn't do anything. She looked away. I know. But she didn't, not completely. They spent another hour sorting through the remnants of a relationship that had ended before either of them was ready. When Claire found a small wooden box containing handwritten notes Julian had given her over the years, she froze. Do you want me to take those? Ethan asked. I don't know. Then don't decide today. She looked at him. How do you always know what to say? I don't, Ethan smiled. I just know what not to say. She laughed again. This time, she didn't apologize. After that Saturday, they began seeing each other occasionally. Never deliberately. Never enough to call it dating. Coffee after work. A walk along the river. A quick lunch when Claire needed to get out of the office. Ethan never asked about Julian unless she brought him up. Claire never asked about Sabrina unless she needed an honest answer. Slowly, something changed between them. It happened in the spaces between conversations, in the way Ethan waited for her to finish speaking instead of preparing his response. In the way Claire began checking her phone and smiling when his name appeared, in the way silence around him stopped feeling awkward. One evening, they stood outside a restaurant in West Loop while snow fell lightly between the streetlights. You should go home, Ethan said. Claire looked at him. Why? Because it's late. That's not an answer. He smiled. Because I don't trust myself to keep pretending this is nothing. Her expression changed. The city seemed to grow quieter around them. Ethan. I know. He looked away. I know exactly what this looks like. Does it look like something? To me, yes. Claire's heart began beating faster. What do you want? Ethan took a breath. I want to kiss you. She stared at him. He continued before she could answer. And that's exactly why I won't. Why? Because Julian is still your ex-fiancé, because he's still my best friend. Because you're hurt. And because if I kiss you now, everyone will decide I was waiting for my chance. Claire's voice was barely audible. Were you? Ethan looked at her. No. Then why do you look like that? Because sometimes wanting something doesn't make it right. Claire swallowed. She understood him, perhaps too well. You know, she said, everyone keeps telling me I should hate Julian. Do you? Sometimes. And sometimes? She looked down at the snow accumulating on her coat. Sometimes I miss the man I thought he was. Ethan nodded. That's not the same as wanting him back. I know. She looked at him. Do you? Yes. How? Ethan's eyes held hers. Because I know what it's like to love someone who isn't who you believed they were. She realized then that Ethan wasn't talking only about Julian. He was talking about himself. About friendship, loyalty, disappointment, and the strange grief of discovering that someone you had admired could become someone you no longer recognized. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Claire said. I know. Are you going? I don't know. If you do. She hesitated. Don't let him hurt me again. Ethan's face tightened. He won't. You can't promise that. Then I'll promise something else. What? I won't help him hurt you. They stood there for a long moment. Neither moved closer. That restraint became its own kind of intimacy. 3 weeks later, Ethan would stand beside Julian at the altar. At least, that was what everyone believed. What none of them understood was that Ethan had already begun questioning whether friendship required silence, whether loyalty could survive dishonesty, and whether standing beside a man at his wedding meant endorsing the choices that had brought him there. And Claire, despite everything, had begun to understand something equally dangerous. Sometimes, the person who helps you gather the broken pieces of your old life becomes the first person you imagine building something new with. But neither of them was ready to cross that line. Not yet. By the time the wedding was 3 weeks away, Claire had stopped measuring her life by the date of Julian's ceremony. She removed the countdown from her phone, took her engagement ring to a jeweler, and sold the diamond without telling anyone. The money went into a new savings account with only her name on it. It was not revenge. It was the first financial decision she had made in years that did not include another person. She moved into a small apartment in Lincoln Park. 1 bedroom with crooked hardwood floors and windows that faced an alley instead of the Chicago skyline. The first night there, she sat on the floor surrounded by unopened boxes and listened to the elevated train rumble somewhere beyond the buildings. It was not beautiful. It was not impressive. But everything in it belonged to her. Her sofa. Her books. Her coffee maker. Her silence. Claire smiled for the first time in weeks. Okay, she whispered to the empty room. Let's see what happens. At work, she stopped leaving early to meet Julian for dinner. She took on a difficult commercial project that required travel to Milwaukee twice a month. She joined a Pilates studio near her office. She called her sister on Sundays. She started eating breakfast instead of surviving on coffee until noon. Slowly, almost invisibly, she became busy with a life that did not have Julian at its center. Julian noticed. He noticed when Claire stopped responding immediately to his messages. He noticed when she changed her profile picture from one of them to a photograph of Lake Michigan at dawn. He noticed when mutual friends stopped saying, "Have you talked to Claire?" and started saying, "Claire's doing well." One afternoon, Julian was sitting in his office when his assistant placed a folder on his desk. "Your lunch meeting with the developers is at 1. Cancel it," she blinked. "You asked me to confirm it this morning." "I know." He stared at his phone. No new message. "Actually, keep it." She left. Julian opened Claire's social media page again. He hated himself for doing it. There was nothing dramatic. No photographs of another man, no pointed captions. Just Claire standing outside a modern office building, wearing a dark coat and smiling at a colleague. The caption read, "New project. New chapter." Julian stared at those words until his screen dimmed. Sabrina entered his office without knocking. She was carrying a garment bag. The fitting went well. Julian looked up. "Good. That's all?" "I'm working." Sabrina smiled faintly. "You haven't asked to see the dress." "Of course I want to see it." "You don't sound like it." Julian stood. "I'm sorry." She watched him carefully. "You're thinking about Claire?" "No." "Julian," he sighed. "Sometimes." Sabrina's expression tightened. "She left you." "I know. You chose me." "I know. Then why does it feel like you're still waiting for her?" Julian didn't answer. Sabrina stepped closer. "You told me she wasn't right for you anymore." "She wasn't. Then why do you keep looking at her?" He looked away. "I don't know." Sabrina laughed without humor. "That's a terrible answer 3 weeks before our wedding." Julian's voice hardened. "I'm marrying you because I want to be there for our child." "That's not what I asked." She put the garment bag down. "Do you love me?" Julian looked at her. The answer should have been easy. Instead, it took him several seconds. "Yes." Sabrina noticed the hesitation. She always noticed. You used to say it without thinking. People change. Apparently. She walked out. That evening, Julian called Claire. She almost didn't answer. Hello? How are you? Fine. That's it? What did you expect? I don't know. Claire leaned against her kitchen counter. You called me. I wanted to hear your voice. Her eyes closed. Once, those words would have undone her. Now they only made her tired. You shouldn't do this. Do what? Call me when you're confused. I'm not confused. Then why are you calling? Silence. Claire waited. I heard you got promoted, he said. Congratulations. Thank you. I'm proud of you. She swallowed. You don't get to be proud of me now. Julian's voice dropped. Why not? Because you don't get to leave and still claim the parts of me that make you feel good about yourself. He went quiet. I didn't mean to leave you completely. Claire almost laughed. You left me completely. She ended the call before her voice could betray her. Across town, Ethan Calloway was sitting alone in his office, staring at a spreadsheet he had no interest in. He had been helping Julian's father with some financial documentation related to the wedding. It was a favor. Nothing more. But one name caught his attention, Sabrina Cole. There were reimbursement records from a medical clinic, several months before the pregnancy had supposedly been discovered. Ethan frowned. He opened another file. Then another. The dates didn't make sense. Sabrina had told Julian she discovered the pregnancy after a routine appointment in November. But one of the insurance statements showed a prenatal consultation in late September. Ethan leaned back. His first thought was innocent. Maybe the date had been entered incorrectly. He checked again. It wasn't. He called the clinic listed on the paperwork, but the receptionist refused to discuss a patient's medical information. Ethan didn't push. He knew better. Instead, he called Julian. What's up? Julian answered, I need to ask you something. About what? When did Sabrina find out she was pregnant? There was a pause. Why? Just answer me. November. Are you sure? Julian's tone changed. Yes. Why? Nothing. Ethan ended the call. He stared at the paperwork again. Something was wrong. He didn't know what. And he wasn't interested in inventing a scandal simply because he disliked the situation. But the dates bothered him. So did something else. He remembered the night Julian had first confessed the affair. Julian had told him it began in October. But the clinic records suggested Sabrina had already been receiving prenatal care before that. Ethan opened his notes from an earlier conversation. October. That was the date Julian had given him. If Sabrina had already been pregnant in September, then Julian's story had a hole in it. Ethan's phone buzzed. It was Julian. You called? Yeah. What's going on? I was looking at some paperwork. What paperwork? Nothing important. Ethan. I'll talk to you tomorrow. No. Talk to me now. Ethan rubbed his forehead. I found a date that doesn't make sense. Julian went silent. What date? A prenatal appointment. Another silence. Longer this time. Where did you see that? Your father's financial files. That's private. Then explain it. Julian's voice became defensive. I don't have to explain Sabrina's medical records to you. No. But you do need to explain why the timeline you gave me doesn't match what I'm seeing. You're looking for something that isn't there. Maybe. Ethan closed the folder. But I'm going to find out. Julian hung up. Ethan stared at the phone. For the first time, he wondered whether Julian himself knew the entire truth. The following Sunday, Ethan met Claire for coffee. She was wearing a navy coat and had her hair tied back loosely. She looked different, not happier exactly. Stronger. You look good, Ethan said. I feel good. That's better. She smiled. How's Julian? Ethan hesitated. Getting married. I know. Are you okay with that? Claire looked through the cafe window. I'm learning that okay doesn't have to mean happy about it. Ethan nodded. That's fair. She studied him. Something happened. What? You're distracted. Ethan considered telling her. He decided against it. Just work. Claire didn't believe him, but she didn't press. Instead, she stirred her coffee. I used to think Julian was the center of my life. And now? Now I think he was just standing in the middle of it. Ethan smiled. That's a good distinction. She looked at him. What about you? What about me? Are you still going to be his best man? Ethan looked down. I haven't decided. Claire's expression became serious. Don't decide because of me. I'm not. Good, she hesitated. Because I don't want you to lose your friend. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I'm starting to think I already did. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Claire reached across the table and touched his hand. It was a small gesture. Almost nothing. But Ethan felt it all the way through him. He turned his hand slightly beneath hers. Their fingers nearly intertwined. Neither moved. Outside, a bus passed through the rain. Claire, he said softly. I know. She withdrew her hand. We shouldn't. I know. Not until the wedding is over. Ethan nodded. Agreed. But the boundary they had just drawn was no longer invisible. They both knew exactly where it was. And somewhere across Chicago, Julian was beginning to understand that Claire had stopped waiting for him. The realization frightened him more than the wedding ever had. Meanwhile, Ethan closed the file containing Sabrina's pregnancy records and placed it in a locked drawer. He did not know yet what the dates meant. He only knew that something about Julian's story was wrong. And 3 weeks before the wedding, that small inconsistency was enough to make him wonder whether the woman Julian had chosen and the future he had destroyed Claire for had been built on a lie much older than anyone realized. On the morning of Julian Mercer's wedding, Claire Bennett woke before sunrise, not because she was nervous, but because she had finally stopped dreaming about him. For months, her sleep had been filled with fragments of the life they had lost. Julian standing barefoot in their old kitchen, Julian laughing beside the lake, Julian kneeling in the snow with a ring in his hand. That morning there was nothing. Only the quiet hum of traffic outside her Lincoln Park apartment and a gray November sky pressing against the windows. Claire lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Then she reached for her phone. There were 17 messages waiting. Her sister. Her mother. 2 friends asking whether she had changed her mind. One message from an unknown number simply read, "You deserve to be there. Don't let them erase you." Claire deleted it. She had spent enough of her life measuring herself against Sabrina. She wasn't going to spend her wedding day measuring herself against another woman's dress. She got out of bed, made coffee, and opened the curtains. Chicago looked almost peaceful. I'm not going, she said aloud. The apartment did not answer. She smiled faintly. And that's okay. Across the city, Julian stood in front of a mirror while his father adjusted his tie. The suit was charcoal, tailored in Milan, and cost more than Claire's first apartment had. You look like your grandfather, his father said. Julian stared at himself. Do I? That's a compliment. I know. His father straightened the tie. You made the right decision. Julian's eyes met his father's in the mirror. Did I? You have a child coming. I know. Then stop questioning it. Julian looked away. Claire isn't coming. His father paused. How do you know? She told my mother. Good. Julian frowned. Good? You don't need unnecessary drama today. Julian said nothing. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. Today is about family. Julian nodded, but the word felt strangely hollow. Family. He had used it to justify everything. The affair. The broken engagement. The wedding. Every time someone questioned him, he had said the same thing, I have a responsibility. But responsibility had become a shield he could hide behind, and somewhere deep inside, Julian knew it. At 11:45, Claire was walking along the lakefront. She had dressed simply in a dark wool coat and boots, no makeup except lipstick. She had her hands in her pockets and no destination in mind. She passed couples taking wedding photographs near the water and looked away. She was not bitter. She simply didn't want to watch another woman stand inside the future that had once belonged to her. At noon, her phone rang. Ethan. She answered after the 3rd ring. Hi. His voice was quiet. Where are you? Walking. You're not going? No. A pause. Are you sure? Yes. Good. Claire smiled. That's not the response I expected. I mean good because you're doing what you want. You sound strange. I'm fine, Ethan, he exhaled. I may be late. Claire stopped walking. Late to the wedding? Yes. Why? I have something to take care of. Ethan, whatever it is, don't do anything because of me. I'm not, promise. I promise. She looked across the lake. Then I'll see you later, Claire? Yes? Whatever happens today, don't let anyone convince you that you are the problem. Her throat tightened. Okay. They ended the call. Claire did not know that Ethan was sitting in his car 3 blocks from the church, staring at a file on the passenger seat. He had spent the previous 48 hours verifying what he could without violating anyone's privacy. The dates were real. Sabrina's prenatal consultation had occurred weeks before Julian claimed the affair began. More troubling was the identity of the physician. Dr. Marcus Hale had been listed on the paperwork. Ethan knew that name. Everyone in Julian's circle knew it. Marcus Hale was Sabrina's former employer. He was also the father of her previous child, according to rumors that Ethan had never taken seriously. Rumors were not evidence. But Ethan had found something else. A message from Sabrina to Julian, sent before Julian ever confessed the affair to him. If you want this baby to have your name, you need to decide before she finds out. Ethan had read the message 3 times. There was no explicit explanation. But there was enough to know Julian had not told him the whole story. Ethan closed the file, then he drove to the church. The ceremony had already begun. Sabrina walked down the aisle beneath a canopy of white flowers, her hand resting protectively over the curve of her stomach. Julian stood at the altar. For one brief second, he imagined Claire walking toward him instead. The image was so vivid that his chest tightened. Then Sabrina reached him. Everyone stood. Music filled the church. Julian took her hand. You okay? She whispered. Yes. You look pale. I'm fine, she smiled. The priest began speaking. Julian barely heard him. Then the doors at the back of the church opened. Ethan walked in. He was still wearing the suit he had planned to wear as best man, but he had removed the boutonniere. Heads turned. Julian's face changed. Ethan walked down the center aisle without looking at anyone. He stopped halfway. Julian stared at him. Where have you been? Ethan said nothing. The priest paused. Sabrina turned. Ethan? Julian stepped away from the altar. You're supposed to be standing beside me. Ethan looked at him. I can't. A murmur moved through the church. Julian's face reddened. What the hell does that mean? It means I'm not going to stand beside you and pretend I approve of what brought you here. Sabrina's eyes narrowed. This isn't the time. Ethan looked at her. You're right. He reached into his jacket and removed a folded document. That's why I should have said this before the ceremony started. Julian's voice dropped. Ethan, don't. Ethan looked at him. You told me the affair started in October. Julian's expression went blank. Yes, you told me Sabrina found out she was pregnant in November. Yes. Ethan held up the document. Then explain this. Sabrina's face drained of color. Julian stepped forward. Where did you get that? From financial records your father gave me. That's private. So is destroying someone's life with a story that isn't complete. The priest looked between them. Perhaps we should take a moment. No, Julian said. His voice shook. We're not doing this here. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on him. Then tell them the truth. I told you the truth. No. Ethan's voice hardened. You told everyone the version that made you look responsible. Sabrina suddenly whispered, Stop. Ethan looked at her. When did you know you were pregnant? She said nothing. Sabrina. Julian turned toward her. Tell him. She stared at Julian. You promised. His face changed. What did I promise? That you wouldn't tell anyone. Ethan looked between them. Tell them what? Sabrina's eyes filled with tears. I was already pregnant when Julian and I started sleeping together. The church went silent. Julian closed his eyes. He had known. Of course he had known. He had simply convinced himself that the timeline did not matter. Ethan's voice was quiet. Then why did you tell Claire the pregnancy happened after the affair? Julian looked at the floor. Because I didn't want her to know how long it had been going on. Claire's name seemed to echo through the church, even though she was nowhere near it. Sabrina covered her mouth. Julian. Ethan stepped closer. You didn't choose Sabrina because you discovered she was pregnant. You were already cheating on Claire. The pregnancy just became the excuse you used to make the choice sound honorable. Julian's father stood abruptly. Enough. Ethan turned toward him. No. Not enough. Julian looked around the church. Friends, colleagues, family. People who had believed his story. People who had congratulated him for being responsible. He suddenly felt exposed in a way he had never imagined. "I was going to tell Claire," he said weakly. Ethan shook his head. "When?" Julian had no answer. "After the wedding?" Ethan asked. "After the baby?" "I don't know. Exactly." Sabrina began crying silently. The priest stepped down from the altar. "Mr. Mercer, perhaps we should postpone the ceremony." Julian looked at Sabrina, then at Ethan, then at the empty doorway where Claire should have been. He imagined her sitting somewhere alone, refusing to watch. He understood, too late, that she had made the wiser choice. She had walked away before he could humiliate her again. "I can't do this," Julian whispered. Sabrina looked at him. "What?" He took off the wedding ring he had not yet placed on her finger. "I can't marry you today." The room erupted in whispers. Sabrina stared at him as though he had struck her. "You said you chose me." Julian's eyes filled with shame. "I thought I had." Ethan closed his eyes. He had wanted Julian to face the truth. He had not expected the truth to destroy everything in minutes. Julian turned toward the doors. He wanted to call Claire. He wanted to hear her voice. He wanted to say that he finally understood. But for the first time, he stopped himself. He had spent months treating Claire's forgiveness as something he could eventually earn through explanation. He finally understood that she owed him nothing. Outside, rain had begun falling over Chicago. Claire stood beside the lake, watching the gray water move beneath the wind. Her phone remained silent. She did not know that the wedding had collapsed. She did not know that Ethan had refused to stand beside Julian. She did not know that the truth had finally entered the room where she had once imagined saying her vows. And for the first time since Julian left her, Claire did not need to know. She turned toward home and walked away. The morning after the wedding that never happened, Claire woke to 23 missed calls and a city that seemed strangely unchanged. Chicago still moved at its usual pace. Trains rattled over steel tracks. Delivery trucks blocked narrow streets. People hurried beneath umbrellas, carrying coffee as if nothing in the world had been rearranged overnight. Claire sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her phone. She had heard fragments through friends. The ceremony had been stopped. Ethan had refused to stand beside Julian. Sabrina had left the church in tears. No one had told her everything. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her sister called again. This time Claire answered. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Claire, Julian's wedding was cancelled." "I heard." "Because of Ethan." Claire closed her eyes. "What did he do?" "Apparently, he found something wrong with the timeline." Claire sat very still. "What timeline?" "I don't know. Something about Sabrina already being pregnant." Claire looked toward the window. The morning light had turned the building silver. "I don't want to hear any more." "But don't you want to know the truth?" Claire thought about it. "The truth didn't save me." Her sister was quiet. "Maybe it can help you heal." Claire looked down at her hands. "Maybe." But healing, she was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as getting answers. Across the city, Julian sat alone in the apartment he had shared with Sabrina. Her suitcase was gone. Half the closet was empty. The wedding flowers had been delivered that morning by mistake. White roses filled the dining room, absurdly beautiful beneath the gray winter light. Julian stood among them and realized he hated them. Sabrina had left the church with her brother. She had refused to speak to him. The last thing she had said was, "You don't get to call yourself the victim." She was right. Julian knew that. But knowing something and accepting it were different things. His phone rang. It was his mother. "Julian, your father wants you at the house tonight. I'm not coming. This is serious." "I know. You embarrass the family." Julian laughed bitterly. "That's what you're worried about? What do you want me to say?" "Maybe ask whether I'm okay." His mother paused. "Are you?" Julian looked at the roses. "No." She softened. "Come home." "I don't have a home anymore." The call ended. That afternoon, Ethan met Julian in a quiet restaurant in the West Loop. Julian arrived late. He looked exhausted. "You ruined my life," he said before sitting down. Ethan stared at him. "No. I exposed the part you were hiding. You could have told me privately." "I tried. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You were about to marry Sabrina while still lying about why you chose her. Julian looked down. I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do. You just didn't want the consequences. Julian rubbed his face. Do you know what it's like to lose everything in one day? Ethan's expression hardened. Ask Claire. Julian looked up. The name hurt. Don't. You used that woman as a shield for months. I know. Then, don't make yourself the victim now. Julian was silent. I thought if I married Sabrina, everything would become simple, he finally said. The baby. The affair. Claire, all of it. Ethan leaned back. And now? Now nothing is simple. Good. Julian looked at him. Good? Maybe complexity is what happens when you stop lying. Julian's eyes filled with anger. You think you're better than me? No. Ethan's voice softened. I think I made different choices. Julian looked away. Do you love her? Ethan did not answer immediately. Julian laughed without humor. You do. That's not your concern. It became my concern when you walked into my wedding. Ethan's jaw tightened. I didn't walk in because I wanted Claire. Then why? Because you were about to make another irreversible decision based on a lie. Julian looked at him. And if Claire comes back to you? Ethan shook his head. She won't be coming back to anyone. That answer surprised Julian. What does that mean? It means Claire doesn't need to choose between you and me. Ethan stood. She needs to choose herself. 2 days later, Ethan visited Claire. He brought a box containing several things she had left behind at Julian's old apartment, a photograph, 2 books, a ceramic bowl, and a handwritten note she had forgotten inside a desk drawer. Claire opened the door and stared at him. You look tired. Ethan smiled. So do you. Come in. He placed the box on the table. I thought you'd want these. Claire opened it. Her fingers paused over the photograph. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I do. She looked at him. You didn't have to do any of this. I know. Silence settled between them. Ethan stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets. Claire studied him. You haven't called. I didn't want to make this about me. It isn't. I know. Then why are you standing there like you're about to leave? Ethan smiled sadly. Because I'm trying to do one thing right. Claire's eyes softened. What? Not take advantage of the fact that you're vulnerable. She looked down. I'm not that vulnerable. Maybe not. He paused. But you're healing, and you. I'm trying to give you room to do it. Claire sat on the sofa. You were there. At the wedding? Yes. I was. Why didn't you tell me what you found? Ethan sat across from her. Because I didn't want the truth to become another thing you had to carry. I should have been told. Maybe. He nodded. But I was afraid you'd think I did it for you. Claire looked at him. Did you? Ethan met her eyes. No, she waited. I did it because Julian was about to make another choice without understanding what it cost. Claire's throat tightened. And because of me? Partly. He looked down at his hands. But not because I expected anything from you. She was quiet for a long time. Ethan. Yes? When did you start feeling something for me? He didn't answer immediately. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop at the corner. Before the wedding, he said finally. Before Julian left me? She almost smiled. You know what I mean. Ethan nodded. Before. How long? He looked toward the window. Do you remember that trip to Maine? Claire smiled faintly. The rainy one? Yes. You complained for 3 days, I know. He laughed softly. I was miserable. Why? Because Julian spent the whole trip talking about you. Claire's smile disappeared. Ethan continued, not because I was jealous. At least, I told myself I wasn't. He talked about your plans, your work, the house you wanted, the way you remembered everyone's birthdays. He talked about you like he couldn't imagine his life without you. Claire looked down. He couldn't. Ethan nodded. Neither could I. I just understood that differently. Her eyes lifted. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you loved him. And now? Now you're hurt. Claire's voice was quiet. What if I didn't want you to wait? Ethan looked at her. Then I still wouldn't move forward. Why? Because I don't want to become the man who steps into another man's wreckage and calls it destiny. Claire stared at him. You're not. Maybe not. He smiled sadly. But if we ever become something, I want it to begin when you're not comparing me to what Julian did. She looked away. tears gathering in her eyes. I don't know if I can ever stop comparing. Then we wait. For how long? As long as it takes. She laughed through the tears. You make everything sound simple. It isn't. Ethan stood. That's why I'm not promising anything. He moved toward the door. Claire followed him. Ethan. He turned. She hesitated. Thank you. He nodded. You're welcome. She opened the door. He stepped into the hallway, then stopped. Claire? Yes? You don't owe me a chance because I told the truth. I know. Good. He left. Claire closed the door and leaned against it. She expected loneliness. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar. Space. Not emptiness. Space. The freedom to decide what her life would become without Julian's shadow determining the shape of it. Meanwhile, Julian's world continued collapsing. Sabrina refused to return to the apartment. The wedding deposits were disputed. His parents were furious. His law firm quietly removed him from several public-facing matters after gossip spread among clients. Social media turned the cancelled wedding into speculation, with strangers debating who was guilty without knowing any of them. Julian deleted his accounts. Then reactivated them. Then deleted them again. He began seeing a therapist because his mother insisted, but the first several sessions were spent explaining why everyone had misunderstood him. Eventually, even he became tired of hearing himself speak. One evening, his therapist asked, if Claire had forgiven you immediately, what would you have wanted from her? Julian stared at the floor. I wanted her to tell me I wasn't a bad person. And are you? I don't know. That's not the question. Julian swallowed. I did something bad. Yes. But I'm not only that. No, the therapist leaned back. The problem is that you've been more interested in proving you're not a bad man than understanding the damage you caused. Julian said nothing. For the first time, he began to see the difference. Claire had not needed him to be perfect. She had needed him to be honest. He had failed at the one thing she had actually asked for. And now the truth had finally arrived, but it could not rebuild what his lies had destroyed. Weeks later, Ethan and Claire met again at the same coffee shop where they had once drawn a boundary between them. This time, there was no wedding approaching. No Julian waiting at an altar. No secret they needed to protect. Claire sat across from Ethan. I think I'm getting better, she said. I can tell. How? You're not checking the door anymore. She smiled. Maybe. Ethan lifted his coffee. That's progress. Claire looked at him. And I think I still have feelings for you. Ethan's hand stopped. She continued before he could speak. But I don't want to rush. Neither do I. I'm afraid. I know. Of choosing the wrong person again. Ethan nodded. Then don't choose me yet. She looked at him, surprised. You're serious. Completely. A small smile appeared on her face. You're very patient. I'm very stubborn. That's different, not always. They both laughed. For the first time, there was no guilt in the silence afterward. No betrayal waiting underneath it. Just two people sitting across from each other, aware that something might grow between them, but unwilling to force it before it had earned the right to exist. And somewhere else in the city, Julian sat alone in an apartment filled with wedding gifts he could no longer return. He finally understood the cost of what he had done. The truth had not brought Claire back. It had only removed his last excuse for believing she should. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Chicago entered spring as if nothing had ever gone wrong. The snow disappeared from the sidewalks. Trees along the river began showing small green leaves, and outdoor cafes filled their patios with metal chairs before the wind had fully warmed. Claire had stopped checking Julian's name in the news. She no longer wondered whether Sabrina had forgiven him, whether his parents still blamed Ethan, or whether people at Julian's firm whispered about the wedding whenever he walked past. Those things belonged to another version of her life. She had a new apartment now, slightly larger than the first, with tall windows and a narrow balcony where she kept herbs in ceramic pots. She had been promoted at work. Her sister said she looked different. Claire knew what she meant. She looked like someone who had stopped waiting for an apology before allowing herself to live. Ethan had remained in her life, carefully. They had dinner together. They went to bookstores. Sometimes they walked along the river after work and talked until the city lights came on. They had not called themselves a couple. Neither wanted to turn something fragile into a declaration. It was enough that Ethan never rushed her. It was enough that Claire could sit beside him in silence without feeling she owed him anything. Julian noticed the difference from a distance. He saw her once at a charity event in May. She was standing with several architects, laughing about something one of them had said. Ethan was there too, across the room, speaking to a colleague. He did not touch Claire. He did not need to. Julian understood immediately that there was something between them, something patient and unfinished. For the first time, jealousy was not his strongest emotion. Grief was. He went home that night and sat in his car for nearly an hour before going upstairs. On his kitchen table was an old photograph Claire had given him years ago. He had kept it without admitting why. In the picture, she was sitting on the floor of their first apartment, surrounded by unopened boxes, smiling at him while holding a coffee mug. He remembered that day. They had no money, no expensive furniture, no polished life. They had ordered pizza because the stove did not work. Claire had said, "If we're happy here, we'll be happy anywhere." Julian had believed her. He had simply forgotten. The following week, he called Claire. She answered because she had learned that fear was no reason to avoid a conversation. "Hello? It's Julian." She sat quietly at her desk. "I know. Can I see you?" Claire looked out the window. "Why?" "I need to apologize." "You already did." "Not properly." She closed her eyes. "Where?" "Anywhere you want." "The coffee shop on Halsted, okay?" They met the next afternoon. Julian arrived early. He looked older. Not dramatically. There were no gray hairs or visible signs of suffering. He simply looked like someone who had stopped sleeping well. Claire sat across from him. "You look different," she said. "So do you." "That's probably good." "It is." The waitress brought coffee. Neither touched it. Julian looked at Claire for several seconds. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Okay." "I don't expect you to come back." "Okay." "I don't even know what I expect." Claire nodded. "Then why are you here?" Julian's hands tightened around the cup. "Because I finally understand." She waited. "I thought I lost you when I chose Sabrina." "You did. But I didn't understand what that meant." He looked down. "I thought I lost a relationship. A home. A future. I thought those were things I could rebuild." His voice cracked. "I didn't understand that I lost the version of you who believed I was safe." Claire's eyes softened, but she said nothing. "You trusted me," he continued. "And I made that trust look foolish." "Yes. I told myself I had to choose Sabrina because of the baby." He shook his head. "But I was already choosing myself every day." Claire looked at him. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me in a long time." He swallowed. "I was selfish." "You were. I hurt you because I wanted to believe I was a good man." Claire looked down at her coffee. "Do you believe it now?" Julian thought for a moment. "I think I'm trying to become one." That answer surprised her. It was the first time he had not asked her to confirm it. "How is Sabrina?" Claire asked. "We're not together." "The baby?" Julian's expression softened. "She's doing well, It's a girl." Claire smiled faintly. "I didn't know. Her name is Lily." "That's beautiful." "It is." A quiet moment passed. "I'm a father now," Julian said. "And I love her." "Good. But becoming a father didn't make me a better man automatically." He looked at Claire. "I had to learn that." Claire nodded slowly. "I'm glad you did." Julian's eyes became wet. "I miss you." She did not look away. "I know. I miss our life." "I know. I miss waking up beside you." Claire took a breath. "Julian." "I know." He wiped his eyes quickly. "I know what you're going to say." "Then let me say it anyway." He nodded. "You don't get to come back because you finally understand what you lost." He closed his eyes. "I know. Understanding is important. But it doesn't reverse anything." "I know, and I don't hate you." He looked at her. "You don't?" "No." Claire's voice was calm. "I hated what you did. For a long time, I hated the man who did it. But eventually I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life carrying that hatred." Julian looked almost relieved. "Does that mean there's a chance?" Claire's heart tightened. She had expected the question. Still, hearing it made the past suddenly feel close again. "A chance for what?" "For us." She was silent. "I would do anything differently." "I believe you." His eyes lifted. You do? I believe you've changed. He leaned forward. Then why not? Because I changed too. Julian stopped. Claire looked at him with sadness rather than anger. The woman who loved you enough to stay after the first lie doesn't exist anymore. I can love who you are now. But I don't know if I want to be loved by you anymore. The words hurt him. She saw it. But she did not take them back. I used to think loving someone meant staying, she said. No matter how much it hurt. I thought leaving meant the love wasn't real. Julian listened. Now I understand that sometimes love is real and still not enough to build a life on. He lowered his head. Is there someone else? Claire hesitated. She could have lied. Instead, she told the truth. There might be. Julian's face tightened. Ethan. She nodded. Do you love him? Claire looked toward the window. I'm learning what it feels like to be with someone who doesn't make me afraid of being loved. Julian closed his eyes. That sentence hurt more than anything else she could have said. I deserve that, he whispered. You do, he laughed sadly. I spent months hoping you'd come back. I know. And now you're telling me it's too late. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Yes. Julian nodded slowly. I understand. For a moment neither moved. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. Claire looked down. It was a small silver key. What's that? The key to the old house. Claire stared at it. I thought you sold it. I did. She looked up. You sold it? Last month. The house they had planned to raise children in, the house they had argued over paint colors for, the place Claire had once called their forever home. It was gone. Why? She asked. Julian looked out the window. Because I realized I was keeping it as proof that our life had existed. Claire's throat tightened. It did exist. I know. He pushed the key toward her. I just don't need to keep a door open anymore. Claire touched the key but did not pick it up. You should keep it. Why? Because it belongs to the past. And the past is still yours. He nodded. Goodbye, Claire. She looked at him. Goodbye, Julian. He stood. Before leaving, he turned. One thing. What if Ethan makes you happy? Julian struggled to finish the sentence. Don't punish him for what I did. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I won't. He walked away. Claire remained at the table long after he disappeared into the crowd outside. She did not feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in watching a man who had once broken her finally understand why he had lost her. There was only sadness. Some endings did not need a villain standing in the rain. Sometimes the punishment was simply knowing that the person you once loved had become someone you could no longer return to. That evening, Claire met Ethan by the river. He was waiting beneath the lights near the bridge. How did it go? He asked. She looked at him. He apologized. And? I forgave him. Ethan nodded. That's good. It doesn't mean I want him back. I know. Claire stepped closer. I think I'm ready. Ethan did not move. Ready for what? For us to stop pretending we're waiting for something. His eyes searched hers. Are you sure? Yes. Claire, she smiled. This time, I'm choosing. Ethan took her hand. Nothing about the moment was dramatic. No crowd. No vows. No witnesses. Just the city around them, the river moving beneath the bridge, and two people standing at the edge of a future that belonged to neither guilt nor revenge. Claire looked at the lights reflected in the water. For years, she had believed the worst thing Julian had taken from her was their future. She finally understood that he had only taken the future she had imagined. The future she was building now was something else entirely. And this time, she would choose it for herself. 2 years later, Claire Bennett no longer woke up thinking about the wedding that never happened. There were mornings when she remembered it, of course. Memory did not disappear simply because pain became manageable. But the memory had changed shape. It no longer felt like a wound. It was more like an old scar she occasionally touched without realizing it was there. Her life in Chicago had become quieter than the one she once shared with Julian, but it was fuller in ways she had never anticipated. She had become a partner at her architecture firm. She had bought a small townhouse on the north side, not because it was impressive, but because she loved the sunlight in the kitchen. There were plants along the windowsill, books stacked beside the fireplace, and a dining table that did not come from a designer showroom. It came from a local craftsman whose work she had admired for years. The first night she brought it home, Ethan helped carry it through the front door. "This is heavier than it looks," he said. Claire laughed. "You said you could handle it." "I said I could handle most things." "That's not what you said." "I was trying to impress you." 2 years in and you're still doing that?" Ethan smiled. Apparently, their relationship had not begun with a dramatic kiss in the rain. It had begun with patience. Coffee, long conversations, awkward silences. The first time Ethan held her hand, he had asked permission. The first time he kissed her, he had waited until Claire was the one who moved closer. It was almost painfully ordinary. That was what made it precious. They had learned to build trust in small pieces, without demanding that love erase the past. One Saturday morning, Claire stood in the kitchen making pancakes, while Ethan read the newspaper at the counter. "You're burning them," he said. "I'm not, you are. They're supposed to be that color." "That color is charcoal." Claire turned and pointed the spatula at him. "Do you want breakfast or not?" "I want breakfast." "Then stop criticizing the chef." Ethan folded the newspaper. "Yes, ma'am," she smiled. The moment was insignificant, it was also everything. For years, Claire had thought a happy ending would feel like triumph. She had imagined herself standing beside someone at a beautiful wedding while Julian watched from a distance, finally understanding what he had lost. Instead, happiness had turned out to be quieter. It was Ethan washing dishes without being asked. It was Claire leaving her phone on the table without worrying who might call. It was disagreeing without fear that disagreement would lead to abandonment. It was knowing that love did not require her to become smaller. "You know what I like most about this house?" Ethan asked. "The pancakes?" "Absolutely not." She laughed. "Then what?" "You chose everything." Claire looked around the kitchen. "That's a strange thing to like." "No." Ethan shook his head. "It's important." She understood. This house belonged to her before it belonged to them. That distinction mattered, she had made sure of it. The mortgage was in her name. Her finances were separate. Ethan had his own apartment across town, though he spent most nights at her place. They had discussed marriage once. Neither was in a hurry. They were building something rather than trying to prove it existed. Meanwhile, Julian's life had become something quieter too. He had never regained the social standing he once took for granted. The cancelled wedding remained a story people remembered, though less dramatically as time passed. Sabrina had moved to another state with their daughter, Lily. Julian visited every other weekend and spoke to his daughter every night when work allowed. He was a good father. That was one of the few things he had learned to do without asking anyone to praise him for it. His relationship with Sabrina remained civil but distant. There was no romance left, only the complicated responsibility of raising a child together. Julian accepted that. He had learned that some consequences did not disappear simply because you became sorry. One evening, after dropping Lily off at the airport for her return flight, Julian drove home alone. His apartment was clean, expensive, and almost entirely silent. He opened a drawer and found the old photograph of Claire. He sat on the edge of the bed and studied it. She was 28 in the picture. Her hair was shorter. Her smile was unguarded. She was sitting on the floor of their first apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes. Julian remembered what she had said that day. "If we're happy here, we'll be happy anywhere." He had been so convinced that happiness required more. More money. More status. More excitement. More validation. He had mistaken desire for destiny. His phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "Dad, did you see the drawing I sent you?" Julian smiled and opened it. A picture of 3 people holding hands beneath a yellow sun. One figure was labeled, Dad. Another was Mom. The third was Lily. He typed back, "I love it." He put the phone down. Then, his eyes returned to the photograph. For years, he had wondered whether Claire had ever regretted leaving him. He no longer asked. He had finally understood that her happiness was not a verdict on him. She did not need to suffer for him to deserve his regret, she simply needed to live. And she had. A month later, Julian ran into Ethan at a charity event. They had not spoken privately in almost a year. Ethan approached first. "How are you?" Julian asked. "Good. Claire?" "Good." Julian smiled faintly. "I figured." There was an awkward silence. She's happy, Ethan said. I know. Julian looked at him. You love her? Very much. Julian nodded. Good. Ethan seemed surprised. Good? She deserves that. Julian looked across the room. I used to think you stole her from me. Ethan shook his head. I never did. I know. Julian took a breath. She left before you ever became part of her life. Ethan nodded. That's true. Julian looked down at his glass. I hated you for a while, I know. Then I realized I hated myself more. Ethan did not respond. You know what the worst part is? Julian asked. What? I spent so much time thinking someone had to win. Ethan waited. You, me, Sabrina. Claire. Like love was a competition. He laughed softly. It wasn't. No, Ethan said. It wasn't. Julian looked at him. Take care of her. Ethan's expression became serious. She doesn't need me to take care of her. Julian smiled. You're right, that was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Claire had never needed another man to rescue her from Julian. She had rescued herself. Ethan had simply been wise enough not to turn her recovery into a debt. Later that summer, Claire and Ethan traveled to Maine. Not the same town where Julian had once taken them, a different coastal town, quieter and farther north. One evening, they stood on a rocky shoreline while the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. You know, Ethan said, this is much better than our old trip. Claire laughed. Because it's not raining? Exactly. You still complain too much. I've grown. She leaned against his shoulder. A little. He kissed the top of her head. They watched the water in silence. Do you ever think about him? Ethan asked. Claire considered the question. Sometimes. Does it hurt? Not anymore. What does it feel like? She looked toward the horizon, like remembering a house I used to live in. Ethan waited. I know every room, she continued. I remember where the light came in. I remember what the kitchen smelled like. But I don't want to live there again. Ethan smiled. That's a good way to put it. Claire slipped her fingers through his. Julian wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me. Ethan looked at her. What was? Believing that losing him meant losing myself. The wind moved through her hair. I didn't lose myself. I just stopped recognizing myself. Ethan kissed her hand. And now? Now I know who I am. They stood together until the sky turned dark. There was no wedding. No audience. No revenge. No dramatic proof that Claire had won. She did not need one. Somewhere in Chicago, Julian's old life continued to fade into memory. His career survived. His daughter grew. He learned to live with the consequences of his choices. He was not destroyed. He was not redeemed completely either. He simply became a man who knew exactly what he had done. That knowledge would follow him for the rest of his life. Perhaps that was the hardest form of karma. Not losing Claire in a spectacular moment, but waking up years later and understanding that the woman he once believed was replaceable had become the one person he could never replace. And Claire never needed to know that. Her life was no longer built around whether Julian regretted losing her. Her life belonged to her. Ethan was part of it because he had never demanded a place in it. He had waited when waiting was difficult. He had stepped back when stepping forward would have been easier. And when Claire finally reached for him, she did so not because she needed someone to repair what Julian had broken, but because she had become whole enough to choose love without fear. On a quiet Sunday morning, years after the wedding that never happened, Claire stood in her kitchen and opened the curtains. Sunlight filled the room. Ethan was asleep upstairs. Coffee was brewing. Her phone was on the counter, untouched. She looked around at the life she had built. It was not the life she had planned at 28, it was better because it was hers. Claire smiled. Then she turned toward the kitchen, poured 2 cups of coffee, and began another ordinary morning. There was no grand ending. There didn't need to be. Sometimes the most beautiful ending is simply this. The person who broke your heart becomes part of your history, the person who waited becomes part of your future, and you finally become the person who no longer needs either of them to tell you that you are enough.